Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all having a great day. Today we are going to be talking about Starfield. Yes, that game. The one that has half of the internet in love and the other half in absolute flames. While this video is going to be my thoughts, my impressions, and my feelings on the game, I don't want you to think about it in the way that I'm just going to put a number on the game, because really, Starfield is much more than that, and I think it's selling the game short, and in some ways it sells a lot of games short to put a number or an expectation on it, especially when the game is just so varied. But at the time of recording this, I currently have about almost 40 hours in Starfield. I've beat the main quest, I've done a lot of side missions, I've explored a lot of planets, and I still have a lot more to do. In fact, I really would love to just stop this video now and go play more. And let's go ahead and not really jump around the topic anymore. I think Starfield is great. Now, with that, I acknowledge that there are a lot of quote-unquote issues with the game, and that a lot of people have pointed out flaws or issues with the game that in some ways may seem substantially large, but I would like to just point this out that if you are somebody who likes space exploration, if you are somebody who likes Bethesda titles in general, and you like the way that Bethesda does their RPG, then you are going to love Starfield. Starfield is a game where the more effort, the more time, and the more thought you put into it, the more you get back. It's very keen on rewarding your sense of exploration, rewarding your sense of discovery, and just making sure that you have an overall good time. I've seen many people say that one of Starfield's biggest flaws is that it's boring. While I can understand the sentiment, I really don't agree that it's boring, and I think the parts that they're referring to as boring are the parts where you're exploring a planet that seems empty. To give an overview of how Starfield does its exploration and how it does its world building, basically when you land on a planet in Starfield, you're going to have multiple points of interest that you are supposed to run to. You're using your scanner and you're looking across the map to basically see what is on the planet that you should be paying attention to. If you've played No Man's Sky, it's kind of like looking off to the distance and seeing that there's like a monolith or there's something that you can run to that is going to give you an experience on that planet. Typically, it'll be either a structure or a life sign of a new creature that you haven't discovered, or maybe it will be a big gravitational anomaly that you will have to go investigate. Either way, there's a point of interest on each part of a planet when you land, so you always have something to look forward to. Now, the parts that people think are boring are when you're running across the planet to get to those events. And honestly, it really depends on what planet you're on. Not every planet is going to be full of a crazy amount of stuff to do. That's just kind of the nature of having so many different locales that you can explore. Now, what I will say to the people who don't like the idea that there's a lot of empty space, what I would do is when you land down on a planet, if it looks incredibly empty, if it looks like a moon basically where there's not a lot of stuff going on, you see maybe one or two outposts, I would encourage you to do those outposts, and then if you're not having fun with anything else that's on the planet, feel free to leave and go to a different planet. And I can already hear some people saying, well, Rice, isn't that just lazy game design? Isn't that just kind of a bad structure of how to make a video game engaging? And while I do hear those criticisms, I would encourage you to remember that Starfield, at its core, is a game about space exploration. It is definitely still a Bethesda RPG, but it's very different than a Skyrim or a Fallout. It incorporates a lot of those moments and those crafting things that you get from something like No Man's Sky, but the thing that I think Starfield does much better than No Man's Sky is it incorporates that into the RPG aspect. So it is a part of the game, and it is deep enough where if you want to spend a lot of time doing it, you can certainly do that, but the game does not rely on that as its own and sole mechanic. I feel the biggest criticism for why this game is considered boring is because space is boring sometimes, and I think people forget that because they're so wrapped up in the thought of, oh, this is a Bethesda game. Yes, it is a Bethesda game, but it's going for a much more realistic take than what a Fallout or a Skyrim is doing. We're talking about literal, like, NASA is a part of the game. Like, exploring these planets and these solar systems is trying to go for a much more realistic tone. It's still giving you a fantasy to live out as a role-playing game, but it's doing it for the people that love space. And as somebody who loves space and space exploration, I think this game achieves great success with that. I also think it is a fantastic role-playing game. I gotta be honest, I didn't expect it to be as good in the role-playing department, especially after coming fresh off of something like Baldur's Gate 3. I do intend on making a video about that, by the way. If you're interested, feel free to leave a comment. But Baldur's Gate 3 really showed me what a role-playing game can be, and even though Starfield doesn't hit those highs of success that Baldur's Gate 3 does, I very quickly understood that Bethesda is really trying to get back to their roots. When you pick a role to play in Starfield and you start working on building your character and making it what you want to be, the game basically lets you play it out just as you would. I don't feel like there's a restriction on what you can be in Starfield, and that's something I can't say about a lot of open world RPGs. If you were to take a game like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, or you were to take a game such as The Witcher 3, those games feel a lot more hand-holdy because they give you choices to make, but they don't really let you become the character that you are. They more so let you shape what the character is. And I think Starfield is a perfect example of letting you create your character, but then also letting you flesh your character out in ways that you didn't expect you could do. That type of freedom and that type of open availability to really be what you want your character to be is exactly why I think Starfield is so great. Starfield doesn't handhold you for almost anything, and it's really refreshing to have a game that gives you the control to be what you want to be. Another criticism I see a lot of people bring up is that the combat sucks. Now, I gotta be honest, I don't agree with that whatsoever. I think a lot of people that are making comments that the combat sucks are people that only play Call of Duty. I think it is fair to say that compared to some other games and some other genres, the combat isn't as strong, but considering all the different amounts of things you get to do in Starfield, the combat perfectly suits it. Another thing I'd like to point out is this is the best combat Bethesda has ever done, hands down. If you've played Fallout 4 or you've played Skyrim, you know what floaty combat can feel like, and at no point did I ever feel like the combat was super floaty or disingenuous to what I was trying to achieve with it. It never felt like I got to the lowest lows of the combat of the other Bethesda games I've played. This has always felt like a really consistent part in Starfield, and at no point did I ever really say to myself, man, I wish the combat was better. To be completely transparent, I didn't really use a lot of melee weapons, so in terms of the melee side of things, I can't really speak too much. But when I'm talking guns, this game is awesome. There is so much variety in the amount of weapons and the amount of options that you have when it comes to ballistic weapons versus laser weapons versus particle beam weapons. There is so much variety, and I'd say, like, compared to something like Fallout, this gives you far and above what you could possibly achieve in Fallout. The other point to bring up is the combat feels way more AAA than what I was expecting. Now that's gonna sound kind of like a backhanded compliment, but basically what I mean is that if you've ever wanted your Bethesda game to feel on par with other shooters like a Call of Duty or like any other shooter on the market, this game actually feels like a proper shooter. I think the reason some people think the combat is boring is because they've played a game that shoots like this. I think the impressive part is that the combat is as good and is as functional as it is in a game as big as Starfield. That's pretty impressive to me. As far as one negative that I actually do agree with people on is the AI. The AI is not the smartest, and in fact I've had a lot of issues with the AI in parts where like I'd be in a fight and the AI is just not very smart. Sometimes it'll just stand there, but I will say it's not as bad as some people make it out to be. A perfect example of that is AI will definitely run away from you and they will definitely try to duck and cover from you. In fact, I've even seen some enemies try to get behind cover to the point where I would actually have to either try to snipe them from cover or I would have to actually flank them, which in a Bethesda game, I don't think I've ever seen somebody take cover before, so that was kind of cool to see. Another part that makes the combat feel really good is after you've killed an enemy, they kind of ragdoll, which I'm not really used to seeing them ragdoll in this way. It almost feels more like a GTA in that sense. But honestly, I think the combat is very good. I think it's very fun, and depending on what you do to level up your character and depending on what perk and skill points you put in, I think it's really great. I will say too, sometimes people have the notion that combat is bad just because you get a weapon that's not good. There are so many different weapons in Starfield. I would really challenge you to experiment and try a bunch of different stuff to see what style fits you, because there is a lot to experiment with. On the topic of combat, let's go ahead and discuss flying a starship. This is the first game that I've played where, aside from a horse, you basically get to actually control a moving vehicle in a Bethesda game. And honestly, it's pretty mixed for a lot of people on whether it feels good, whether it feels bad. I'm personally on the side of, I think it feels very realistic and it feels very natural. At no point while I'm flying the ship do I ever really think it's not doing what I want it to do. And in fact, it actually is a lot more responsive than what I expected. It's definitely not going to be arcadey, so if you've played a game like Everspace or Chorus or any other kind of space flight game, it's definitely not going to be as arcadey and shoot 'em up as you think it's going to be. Which personally I'm okay, because it does incentivize you. If you want to get a ship that controls extremely well, that's very nimble, you really have to either mess with the ship customization, or you really need to put a lot of skill points into making your ship better. And it really goes back to that RPG aspect I was talking about, to where the more you put in, the more you get out. And I really feel like it is a system built on that. So if you focus a lot on making your ship the best it can possibly be, you're gonna have a great ship. I would even go so far as to say that your combat experience is also going to be great. I think the biggest thing is people really want a more arcadey experience, but Starfield just isn't arcadey. It's so realistic that you even have to divert your power source to different parts of your ship, such as your gravitational drive, your weapons, your missiles. It's very grounded in reality, and I think that's what's throwing a lot of people off, is that it's just not what you're expecting. But just because it's not what you're expecting doesn't mean it's bad. It knows the ship combat is going to be something that takes people a little bit to really get a hold of, and it even goes so far as to give you a lock-on targeting system that slows things down, lets you decide which parts of the ship that you're fighting that you would like to actually shoot towards, and it really kind of, once again, creates that strategic RPG gameplay that you would want from controlling the starship. Overall, combat in general and flying your starship, I think it's great, and I think really once you get the hang of it, once you allow yourself some time to really experiment and try things out, I think you're going to get the hang of it and really enjoy it. Now, one critique I've seen floating around a lot. Now, this is one that I definitely understand the concern, but I have a very strong pushback with, and that is the fast travel. If you ask anybody who's played Starfield, they're immediately going to tell you that fast travel is a very strong and prominent part of the game. Now, while this is true, while you will be fast traveling a lot, it is not nearly as bad and as huge of a problem as people say it is. And the reason I'd like to point that out is because when you are flying a starship, and you have a planet that is exactly 7 to 10 hours away from you in real time, which the game is attempting to establish that these planets are very far apart from each other, then yes, that fast travel is going to help a lot. And for some people who are really worried about breaking immersion with getting into menus and things like that, one thing I would point out is that when you are flying your ship and you want to fast travel to a point, you can literally press a button while you're flying and you can see on the screen where you want to travel to. So if there's a planet directly in front of you, you can hit that to travel to it. Otherwise, if you have a mission that is pointing somewhere else, you can also manage your ship to look that direction. You can look for it, and then you can fast travel within the ship without ever getting into a menu. Now, for a lot of people, the biggest problem with fast travel is the loading screens in between. I have to say, for me personally, I don't have that issue at all. I am playing on PC with a 3060 with a Ryzen 5 processor, and at no point did I ever think that the loading screens were a very big deal. I have seen on Xbox that the loading screens are a little bit longer. However, I don't think I've ever seen one go past about 12 seconds. I think another part that is important to point out is that you do not have to fast travel if you do not want to. Obviously, there will be a little bit of a loading screen going into a ship versus getting off of a ship, getting onto a planet versus getting off of a planet, but if you really want to fly from one planet to another, you can do that. But honestly, I think you would rather sacrifice the few second loading screen than fly 7 hours to the planet you're trying to get to. with space travel, that is just a reality that you have to accept. And I think that's the problem. That's where the disconnect with people comes from, is that they expect a game to be one way, but they expect instantaneous travel when we're talking about space. I do understand the annoyance of having to wait for a load screen, but honestly, Starfield is keeping everything as realistic as it can within the boundaries of a video game, and I think it does a pretty good job of balancing the two out. Another thing I think that's important to remember too is when you are choosing which planet to fast travel to, it's treating it like a star map. It feels very Mass Effect-ish, so if you've ever played Mass Effect and you've ever thought Mass Effect did things really well, it's essentially a very similar system. The only difference is you have to choose which planet you're going to land on. And the other thing that's nice too is it does force you to explore and experiment with different routes. Perfect example is if a quest you're wanting to go on is on a star system that is about like maybe 3 solar systems away, you will have to actually travel along the path to get to that solar system. You can't just instantly get there. You do have to be able to earn it. And if you want to, it allows you to explore the solar systems that you're visiting along the way, so it increases and incentivizes you to explore those different planets. Another point to point out when regards to fast travel and wanting to make sure that exploration is a big part of it is a lot of the things, even when you're on planets, you do have to explore the thing before you can fast travel to it. Much like other Bethesda games, you cannot just magically appear in a place you've never been to. You do have to go to these places to fast travel. Overall, I think exploration, travel, fast travel, I think it's all done relatively well, and I don't really have any significant issues with or have any objective points to point out in the ways that it's bad. Another solid criticism I've seen from a lot of people are that the graphics or that the animations of some of the characters or a lot of the characters look very strange. They feel like very uncanny valley. Honestly, I don't really have an issue with the way anything looks. I've gotten some absolutely beautiful screenshots from this game, and one really cool feature about it that you may not know is that when you are taking pictures in the game will slowly start to incorporate those into your load screens. So your load screens actually become a visible gallery of all the pictures you've taken, which, if you're like me, you've probably taken a ton, and it really just treats you to a nice vista of all the amazing things you've seen. I actually like the way they incorporate conversations with NPCs in this game, because rather than like other Bethesda games where they try to show you everything that's going on, they do center focus on the one person you're talking to at a time, and each time somebody's talking, it allows you to very much just stay focused on the conversation and really put yourself in the boots of you playing and role-playing as your character. It's a choice that may not be for everybody, but ultimately I don't have any qualms with it, and I think it's a really cool system. Another part of interacting with NPCs is you now have a persuasion meter, which basically every time you get into a conversation with somebody and you need to convince them of something, you're able to persuade that person with different types of dialogue. I think this system is really cool, and the way that it utilizes your ability to persuade somebody is very different and very more unique than any of the other Bethesda games before. It doesn't go on a basic random chance, it lets you actually plead your case. I think that's a really cool system, especially after playing something like Baldur's Gate 3. I'm happy it wasn't as simple as just pressing one button, but allowing you to really think. Touching on the very last major criticism that I've heard a lot of people talk about, at least I think it's the major last criticism. It's hard to tell because people are constantly coming up with reasons why Starfield is bad, and I just don't get it personally. But the last thing I want to talk about is the story. Without spoiling anything, I absolutely understand why some people have a problem with the story. However, personally, I actually saw it through to the end, which I've never done with a Bethesda game, and the story is worth going through, if for nothing else, to help you get to the end game portion of it. That way you have a lot more abilities and a lot more things you can do than what you could do before. I think overall the characters, the story, the things and themes that are written, I think they're all pretty interesting and compelling, and the way that people really throw things back at you and you really have to think. I personally think it's pretty good. I could see some people relating it to a derivative and more unsuccessful version of some other stories told in recent times, but honestly, I don't think it's that big of an issue. And to be honest, the side content and the side quests, like in most Bethesda games, are so impressive and so deep and so good that I really don't think it matters too much. Overall, I think a lot of the issues people have with Starfield are very overblown, and I think if you just approach the game as what it is, which is a space RPG made by Bethesda, I think you're going to have a great time with it. I've put, like I said, 40 hours in, and I just want to keep playing more. Bethesda is so good at giving you things, that little carrot on the stick to just keep running towards, and to just keep exploring and experimenting. And nicely, Starfield has an unlimited level cap, which is incredible for an RPG this huge. It gives you so much reason, so much content, so much incentive to just keep playing and exploring. It literally feels like the unlimited RPG that you would want from Bethesda. Before I leave you, I should touch on how it runs on Steam Deck. Surprisingly, it runs on Steam Deck. Honestly, I was not expecting to get much of any kind of good performance from it. It's not perfect. It has some issues, but I got it to run at about 30 frames a second. Obviously, you want to keep it on low settings, and you want to basically do all the things that you would to basically limit it, but I got it to run at about 30 frames fairly steady, with a few dips here and there. Surprisingly, it looks really good on Steam Deck. I would say if Steam Deck is your only option, it's going to be a little bit of a rough time. Not so much if you're playing in portable, but if you actually are playing this on the TV docked, it does not look very good. I would not blow this up to a 4K TV. But just running on Steam Deck, I think it's not the worst thing I've seen run on Steam Deck, and I think you could do much worse. That being said, if you have a PC or an Xbox to play this on, I would highly suggest playing it on that instead. But it's definitely not bad for just doing a little bit of grinding, or maybe some ship customization, or maybe just even some resource management. Overall, guys, Starfield is a ton of fun, and even if it has problems, even if there's things to nitpick about it, the ultimate part of a video game that is the most important above all is if it's fun to play. And I can 100% say I've had a blast, no pun intended, playing Starfield. I think it is incredibly fun. It's so fulfilling to do a lot of these quests and just to explore the galaxy. Like, there is so much to do in Starfield, and I found so much of it fun. And at the end of the day, that's all a video game really needs to achieve. And for me, Starfield has achieved that tenfold. And with that, those are my thoughts and my debunks on Starfield. Tell me what you guys think. Have you guys played Starfield? I would love to know what you think about it. This is a huge game, and there's so much to explore, and there's so much to gather from it. I would love to know your thoughts. So please feel free to comment below. Whether it's good, whether it's bad, I want to hear all of it. If you did make it this far, if you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like. If you didn't, no worries, feel free to dislike. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, be sure to subscribe to the channel to see more content. Much appreciated for watching. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day and stay safe.